Which 360 video settings should you use with the Insta360 X5? Choose the wrong settings and your shots will look low quality, kinda blurry, and probably have bad exposure. Choose the right settings and your shots will look crisp and clear with high dynamic range and smooth motion. So in this video, I'll show you exactly which settings to use in which situations, as well as how you can easily unlock far higher video quality with the X5. Now, before we get started, feel free to download my free Insta360 Cinematic LUT pack, which is a pack of drag and drop color presets that I've tailored to 5 of the most common shooting situations you'll find yourself in. These LUTs will instantly make your shots more cinematic, regardless of the Insta360 camera you're using. You can download the full pack for free down below. Big thanks to Insta360 for sponsoring this video. Now grab your camera and follow along. Okay, so step 1 is getting yourself an Insta360 X5. If you haven't bought one yet, then I will link it down below. Step 2 is getting yourself an SD card, and I would strongly recommend buying an SD card with plenty of storage space, anywhere from 512 gigabytes all the way up to 1 terabyte. And the reason that this is important is that in order for us to use the best settings of the X5 with the highest quality, we're going to need storage space to record the highest quality files possible. So I'll link my recommended SD cards down below. Now, if you go into the video mode of the X5, and this is 360 video, if you tap that and then tap the settings icon down the bottom here, this is where we can change our resolutions and frame rates. And you'll notice that there are multiple different options here to choose from, since the camera can only capture a certain amount of frames at really high resolution. So you'll find that the lower the resolution goes, the more frames that it will be able to capture. So it starts at 8K 30, then the next option is 5.7K all the way up to 60 frames a second. Then with 4K, you can go up to 120 frames a second, which is slow motion. Now let's take a look at some side-by-side footage. But before we do that, I'd recommend watching this video in full screen so you can see the proper differences in quality between the various modes. Okay, now firstly, let's take a look at sharpness. Here's 5.7K on the left versus 8K on the right. And even in this wide angle shot, 8K is noticeably sharper in both the background and on me. Then when we punch in, look at the difference between these two. I think we can all agree that 8K looks far better and sharper than 5.7K. Now there is this 5.7K plus option here with a maximum frame rate of 30, and 5.7K plus seems to be somewhere between 5.7K and 8K in terms of sharpness and overall quality. So it's pretty decent, but definitely not the best of the three. And from what I understand, 5.7K plus is essentially a downscaled version of 8K, and it's supposed to keep file sizes down compared to 8K files, which means you could shoot a lot more on the same SD card compared to shooting at 8K. But again, like I said earlier, if you just buy yourself a bigger SD card to begin with, you don't need to shoot at lower resolutions at lower quality just for the sake of saving a little bit of card space. So I hereby eliminate 5.7K plus from this comparison. Don't use it. Okay, so the comparison's done, right? Well, not so fast. While resolution is one factor, frame rates is another. So the reason you'd shoot in 5.7K mode obviously isn't for the quality, but rather the frame rates, since 5.7K allows you to shoot at 60 frames a second, which means you're capturing double the amount of frames with every video. Since 8K 30 obviously captures 30 frames in every second, whereas 60 FPS captures 60 frames that are then played back within the same second. The reason I'm pointing this out isn't because you're using that 60 frames a second to slow the footage down to a slow motion shot, but rather it can be used as a stylistic tool to play your footage back at regular speed with more frames in between. And this captures fast motion extra well. As you can see in this shot, I'm moving the camera around quite a bit. This is 60 FPS. And it's just got a more realistic feel to it. Kind of like you're actually there with me, like moving around this location. And even when I move the camera around on the selfie stick, you'll notice all movement of both me and the background is extra clear and sharp. Again, this is because we're capturing 60 frames in every second, therefore it's able to project that movement with extra realism. Whereas when we watch back a very similar camera movement at 8K 30, you really can notice the jittering between frames as I'm flailing around with this camera. It is kind of noticeable, especially with fast movements like the way I'm moving the selfie stick, which is why personally I like to shoot at 5.7K 60 for anything that's fast moving. However, not every scene will need motion captured so smoothly, which is where using 8K 30 is going to be the obvious choice, since you're obviously going to get a lot better sharpness out of your shots, and it also gives you a lot more flexibility to reframe your shots into a closer perspective without it looking noticeably blurry. So 8K is best suited for slower moving scenes where you might be walking or standing and you want the best quality possible. Maybe you've got like lots of details around you and you want the flexibility to zoom in. That's when 8K is absolutely the no-brainer choice. Whereas 5.7K really is better suited to wide angle shots when you know you don't need to punch in too far and you'd rather prioritize the fast movement you're capturing with as much realism and detail in between frames as possible. So for any kind of action shots, 5.7K 60 will be the better choice. Now in 5.7K mode, you can also use active HDR, which is essentially an inbuilt HDR video mode that will noticeably improve your scene's dynamic range. But with that said, it's not a one-size-fits-all setting. I would only use active HDR in scenes where you've got the sun bright in shot. Maybe it's blowing out the sky completely. Well, active HDR is a great choice for bringing it back under control. Whereas on a less sunny day, or if you're not shooting in direct sun, turning on active HDR just won't be necessary, and the drop in quality will make your shot worse than if you were to just shoot in 8K with no HDR. So yes, use active HDR in bright sunlight, but only then. The final resolution setting to consider is 4K, and the only reason you'd use 4K is if you want to shoot slow motion and go all the way up to 120 frames a second to capture action shots and fast movement, which actually looks surprisingly good from the X5 considering it's 4K stretched across an entire sphere. But only use 4K if you're shooting at slow motion. For regular frame rates, it would be much better to go up to 8K and 5.7K. Now, if you're shooting at night time, the X5 has a brand new pure video mode, which can be found here. And what pure video does is it optimizes the internal camera settings and frame rates to perform really well in low light without you having to set the exposure manually. And I've been consistently impressed when I've used pure video mode since it takes the headache out of shooting at nighttime. And most of the time with pure video mode, you won't need to worry about your shots being either too dark, too blurry, or too grainy. Pure video also has the same resolutions and frame rates that we had before, with the only exception being 5.7K doesn't have active HDR or 60 frames a second. Therefore, you would obviously want to shoot at 8K 30. Now, you can manually take control of the X5 by swiping the screen to the right here. It will bring up our automatic and manual exposure options. So straight out of the box, the camera should be set to auto. But if you really wanted, you could change over to manual exposure and set your shutter speed manually, as well as your ISO to find the correct exposure of your scene. However, as you can see here, the difference is negligible, and I haven't yet found a situation where setting my exposure manually was the better option over auto exposure. I know auto exposure comes across as a mode for complete beginners. However, Insta360 have optimized the auto exposure of the X5 so well that it will actually choose the best settings for any scene, no matter what type of situation you're shooting in. Hence, I don't see any reason to shoot in manual exposure. So feel free to keep it in auto. There are a few more things you can change here, even in auto exposure mode, and they are to do with the color profiles, but I found keeping these as is has been the best approach. And yes, this includes white balance. While you can manually set your white balance, I don't see much of an advantage to this since the camera will get it right 99.9% of the time. So leave that in auto. Okay, so that's resolutions, frame rates, and exposure. However, did you know there's a hidden settings menu in the X5? So if you swipe down from the top of the screen, this will bring up the general camera settings, and if you tap the settings icon here, then scroll down until you find image settings and tap that. Here you'll find some extra settings that you can change that may help improve your video quality. These include your video encoding, where you can choose between H.264 and H.265. You can change the bitrate that the camera records, the video sharpness level, as well as anti-flicker, which will be on by default. So here's H.264 and H.265 side by side, and and I see very little difference between them. When I punch in as well, these two shots look more or less the same. So if you've got a recent phone and computer, I'd recommend setting this at H.265 for smaller file sizes and slightly better compression. Otherwise, use H.264 if you know you'll be editing on older devices. Also, with the standard and high bitrate options, again, these look identical. And when I punch in really close, there's just no difference here. So I don't see why you would want to shoot at a much higher bitrate than the standard one, since it's going to take up significantly more space on your SD card compared to shooting at the standard one. The setting that has a very noticeable difference, however, is sharpness. So here again, I've got the same shot with the 3 different sharpness levels, and the one on the left looks noticeably blurry here in the wide shot, whereas the other two look pretty good and definitely sharp enough, especially given that this is 8K footage with all 3. But when we punch in, this is where the differences come out. So obviously low sharpness is really soft and blurry, and the other two are noticeably sharper, which is good. However, if you really stop and observe the finer details here, like on my jumper, you'll notice that it's almost looking a bit grainy here. It's like the sharpening algorithm is really trying to sharpen my jumper and it's coming across like grain, whereas here with regular sharpness, it's not. Also, I can't see a noticeable difference in sharpness when you look at lines on the background behind me. There isn't any part of the image that looks sharper with the high setting. Therefore, medium sharpness is going to be the obvious choice. I hope you learned something today. Both 8K 30 and 5.7K 60 are great modes, and there's a time and a place for either of them. If you find this too overwhelming, I'd just say, when in doubt, go 8K, since you're obviously capturing the most quality possible, and motion blur isn't always noticeable unless you're flailing around the camera like a crazy person, which I'm definitely guilty of. So now that you know which settings to use, all you need to do to put the icing on the cake is to do some quick color grading. And if you find color grading overwhelming, inside my free Insta360 cinematic LUT pack, which I'll link below, you'll get access to my one-click color presets that will instantly take your Insta360 videos from good to great. These LUTs can be used within DaVinci Resolve, Premiere Pro, and Final Cut Pro. And once you've installed them once, you never have to again, and they can then be applied instantly on all of your future videos with one click. If that sounds useful, you can find the link below. And if you've decided that you do want to tackle color grading yourself, in this video here, I share my complete color grading workflow for Insta360 cameras and how you can get cinematic results with your shots every single time.